Emperor Nero. What comes to mind when you hear that name? The teenage emperor who burned down Rome? The man who was the literal Antichrist? The scumbag who kicked his pregnant wife to death? What if I told you that all of it, is simply not true? If I told you that Emperor Nero's life is one of the most extreme cases of history being rewritten by the winners, by the elites, and certainly not by the dead nor the common people. So when it comes to Nero, you most likely have been lied to your entire life. Because, get this, Emperor Nero arguably had the singular best 5 years of reign of any emperor, and he was super popular. But, and this is a Kardashian-sized but, wait, they all got their BBL removed, right? It's not super-sized anymore, damn man. But this is a formerly Kardashian-sized but. Despite all that, Nero was also a deeply troubled man, born to a mother that was such a helicopter that she would even make Cersei spin. And Nero was a teenage emperor with mental issues so unchecked that when given ultimate power and nurtured by yes men, those issues were bound to escalate. There's a lot to talk about in this one, and we're gonna dissect a lot of assumption and clear up lies about Nero in this video that are very disturbing. Which I know is not a warning because it's only going to make you want to watch this video even more. So let's do this. Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus was born on December 15th in 37 AD into quite the family tree. I didn't even notice that rhyme, but you see, from birth, it was Nero's destiny to become the emperor of Rome, the champion of the free, and the terror of the powers that be.
You smoked that.
It wasn't even intentional. Nero's mother was Julia Agrippina and his father was Gnaeus, but Papa Nero is only relevant in that he died when Nero was just 3 years old. So single mom Agrippina it was, and the important thing about Julia Agrippina is that she was part of the emperor bloodline and the sister of Rome's current emperor Caligula, but she was not the sister that Caligula had sex with and married. Nah, she was one of the other two sisters that hated Caligula and tried to kill him. So he had her exiled. You know, just average Roman family stuff. Don't think about it too hard. So in 39 AD, single mother Agrippina found herself exiled on an island with her baby boy Nero, and growing up with Caligula, she had obviously spent plenty of time with her brother. And I mean, there's a reason she tried to kill him, because she knew exactly the type of cruel emperor Caligula was.
I killed the son!
She knew it was just a matter of time before he would have her and her son killed in exile under some random circumstance and pass it off to the people as illness or suicide. So living in exile, Agrippina didn't really care too much about being a good mother for what little time she had left, and instead she let a dancer educate and raise her son. Now, having a dancer educate him, that didn't mean that Nero was learning fire moves like this. It meant that Nero was raised by the lowest of the low, because at the time, dancers, artists, and actors were considered to be on the same level as sex workers. And this is a little bit before OnlyFans, so that doesn't mean that everybody loved them. Nah, they got no respect at all. And remember this, because it will be important later. No father figure, raised by dancers in exile. But little by little, year after year, Agrippina and Nero found themselves still alive, and then suddenly, on January 24th in 41 AD, Emperor Caligula was killed, just 4 years into his reign. And the one to succeed Caligula was his uncle, who obviously was also Agrippina's uncle. It was Emperor Claudius. And Claudius felt a little bit different about family than Caligula.
Family.
So the new emperor immediately called his niece Agrippina and her son back from exile. And once Agrippina got back to Rome, man, listen, I'm just gonna let you know right now that Agrippina had that Circe energy squared. So her exile, that was her shame arc. You get me? And you knew then that if this woman survives, she's gonna come back on some vicious thing because
Hell have no fury. Like a what?
her exile should have been certain death. So once back in Rome, Julia Agrippina basically considered herself having been given a new lease on life. Kind of like, remember this scene from Peaky Blinders?
We died together. Once before. We were cut off from the retreat. No bullets left, waiting for the Prussian cavalry to come and to finish us off. But we were spared. The enemy never came. And we all agreed that everything after that was extra.
Everything was extra from now on, and Agrippina was never going to be used as a pawn by others ever again. She didn't care that Rome was all about biological ding-dong energy because as far as she was concerned, she had the biggest dong energy of them all. So in order to rise in power, she outlined a plan. Get rich or die trying. Agrippina edition. First, she pressured the Emperor Claudius into marrying her to a powerful consul. Then she poisoned the consul to inherit all his money. Then, after the emperor's wife was executed, Agrippina went and married the emperor herself. I feel like I have to elaborate on that last point a little bit. You see, Claudius, the emperor, had a bit of a thing for incest. If you ever wonder why stepmom, mom, and sister and other family members rank so highly in the searches of adult websites, people like Claudius are the reason why. The emperor was really about that life, so tapping his niece was always a bit of a major fantasy for him. And as for his wife getting executed, listen, I should actually do a video specifically on the women that moved Rome behind the scenes. Claudius' wife, Miss Salina, man, she played the emperor like a serious fool, cheating on him left and right, at one point getting married to another man while still married to the emperor, while still married to Claudius, and always either secretly killing or flat out publicly executing anyone that posed a threat to her while she made moves to seize power from her husband. In the end, it got so bad that Claudius, the emperor's own guard, executed the emperor's wife without the emperor's orders in order to save him from her. Do you understand how gullible of a man you have to be cheated on like that, stay married, and have to be saved from your wife that neither loves nor respects you nor really wants to even see you alive, and then have to be saved from her by your own guard killing her? It didn't help that Emperor Claudius had a stutter, a limp, and other handicaps, so generally speaking, the only reason he got any respect was because he was the emperor. Dude was down so bad. Man, he had to divorce his first wife for cheating on him, his second wife for emotionally abusing him, and then his third wife, Miss Alina, who I just told you about, was supposed to be the pinnacle of everything Claudius never learned from. But then Nero's mother, Julia Agrippina, man, she swooped in. She came in, man, she took it.
To a how? Never.
Agrippina seduced Claudius in no time and convinced him that publicly marrying her, his niece, would be a good move since it unites the family and stops all the bad PR that his murderous previous wife caused. Because the public, they loved Julia Agrippina. She was the first Emperor Augustus's granddaughter. She was the poor sister of the tyrant Caligula, a single mom who barely kept her and her child alive in exile. Man, her sob story was solid. Agrippina had everybody fooled, and her popularity gave Claudius a genuine cover to openly live out his incest fantasy. And so, just 8 years after returning from exile, on New Year's Day, 49 AD, Agrippina married the emperor and now found herself in the position of the most powerful woman in Rome.
I don't know where you're at in your life or what you're going through, but I want to tell you to keep going, baby. I want to tell you success is on the other side of it. I want to tell you it's going to be okay. I want to tell you that the windshield is bigger than the rearview mirror for a reason, because what's in front of you is so much more important than what's behind you. Let's party, Nashville!
But if you think that being the empress would satisfy Agrippina's ambition, Nah, man. Remember that this woman considered herself to have the biggest dong in all of Rome, and little Willie Claudius was nothing but a little thorn in her side. For Agrippina's ambitions to be satisfied, the emperor had to die. That kind of rhymed too. That was generally not on purpose. I was gonna end on some epic had to die, but it rhymed. The emperor had to die. Soon after getting married, Agrippina convinced Claudius to adopt Nero and name him his heir. So in 51 AD, Nero found himself heir to the throne alongside his half-brother, Emperor Claudius' son from his previous marriage, Britannicus. At this point, Nero was 13 years young, and once you become heir to the throne, everything you do is under major scrutiny. So when Claudius' advisors started to take a closer look at Nero, they realized that this kid literally had no interest in becoming emperor and was into weird stuff like art, acting, and all that sissy crap. So they were like,
"Why are you gay?"
Who says I'm gay?
You are gay.
Nero did not care about learning the ins and outs of politics, and he had no ambition for power. The kid had a different calling. The kid had different dreams.
I'm an actor.
But his mother, Agrippina, was dead set on her son rising to the top. So when in 53 AD, Claudius, the emperor's daughter, Octavia, also from a previous marriage, was set to get married herself, Agrippina thought that it sure would be nice if the man Octavia is meant to marry dies, and if Octavia marries her son Nero instead to further tie Agrippina and Nero to the throne. So Agrippina publicly accused the man who was meant to marry Octavia of incest, and he was then forced to commit suicide. Let's also take a moment to remember that Agrippina is literally married to her uncle. And then Agrippina offered the grieving, well, kind of widow, Octavia, her son Nero as a husband instead. Here you go. Agrippina had no chill. And actually, I've been saying Circe all along, but that's really more Olenna energy, you know?
You may not have enjoyed watching him die, but you enjoyed it more than you would have enjoyed being married to him. I can promise you that.
So in 53 AD, at age 15, Nero married his stepsister Octavia to keep the tradition of incest going, and now it was finally time for Agrippina to make her final move: kill the emperor. And because any good murderer moves in silence like lasagna, there is no big fanfare to Agrippina getting that job done. It was simply that on October 13th, 54 AD, Claudius died, and the cause of death is only vaguely given as poison, with no clear evidence for who the murderer was, except Agrippina had both the motive, the expertise, so historians generally agree that she was responsible. But regardless of how Emperor Claudius died, the result was the same.
The king is dead. Long live the king.
Or plural in this case. Long live Nero and his stepbrother Britannicus, the new co-emperors of Rome. But conveniently, only Nero was old enough to be considered an adult, old enough to rule, 3 years older than young Britannicus, so that meant that effectively Nero was now the sole emperor of Rome. 13 years after she was exiled, Agrippina had succeeded in making her 16-year-old son Nero the ruler of the greatest empire in the world through murder and deceit. Man, she literally must have felt like this.
Savage! I'm a savage! Oh! I'm a savage! Whatever I want, I'm going to get! Whatever I want, I have to get!
So, as thanks, her son Nero had his mother stabbed to death. Okay, there's a bit more to that. After he took charge, Nero didn't listen to a word his mom said, and he wanted sole power. So for the first couple of years of his reign, Nero had her move to the outskirts of the city. But you know Agrippina, at this point, she's not one to just stay quiet, so she tried to align herself with Nero's younger stepbrother Britannicus to scheme her way back and take down her son. But she taught Nero too well. She could never get to him, and he learned from the best. So first, Nero had Britannicus killed, and then he was like,
Sorry, I'm just gonna go murder Mom. I'll be right back. That's not.
so he had his mother put on a ship that sunk in the middle of the sea with her on board. Except, man, again, this is Agrippina we're talking about here. Of course, this woman did not drown. She swam all the way back to the shore, where she was then surrounded by assassins sent by her son Nero with orders to kill her. But this is Agrippina we're talking about. So she stared them down like,
So. Well, boys. Who's gonna do it then? Who's gonna kill me?
and then she pointed at her womb and told them, "Stab me there, where the monster had been nurtured." And so they did. On March 23rd, 59 AD, Nero had his mother Agrippina killed, and that was the end of the very impressive power rise that was Agrippina's life. And I'm not gonna end another chapter on a rhyme. I'm just saying that this was the dawn of the age of Nero. For the first 5 years of his reign, Nero could be argued to have been the greatest emperor ever. And depending on how much we judge greatness by popularity, many might not even be debatable. Nero banned the death penalty. He cracked down hard on the corruption that plagued Rome. He slashed taxes. He gave unprecedented human rights to slaves. He banned animal blood sport. He reduced the amount of gladiator games by trying to replace them with Greek wrestling. I mean, seriously. This was shades of greatness, of Augustus on steroids. Nero polished up Rome real nice, and on top of that, he was kind of a cool dude. He would make constant cameos on stages and plays, and was generally approachable and relatable despite, or maybe because of his young age. So to say that Nero was beloved by the common people would be an understatement. When I tell you that Nero was the people's champ, loved by the millions of Nero fans all across Rome, but the millions, the common people, they don't write the history books. So a lot of these great deeds went undocumented. In fact, applying logic here would dictate that Nero probably did even more great things that we never heard about because they simply were not documented. Ancient writers, the elites, they hated Nero and tried to ruin him, both while he was alive and decades after his death still. Why that was the case is complex, but it roughly is a mixture of trying to hype up the later emperors by putting down the predecessors, and slander and gossip was a seriously efficient and effective tool in ancient Rome, and the more enemies you have, the more slander you get. And Nero had a lot of enemies, because look at it this way. Like Tiberius and Caligula before him, Nero never wanted to be emperor, he wanted to be a poet. And can you imagine all these old-ass politicians and powerful men who plan out their entire life to one day sit on the throne or get their guy on that throne, and then some 16-year-old sits on it by virtue of his mother, by virtue of a woman, and on top of that, this 16-year-old wants to be an actor and dresses up in women's clothes on stage? I mean, in their minds, this was ridiculously offensive. Like,
That is blasphemous!
So while the people of Rome knew what's what on the streets and felt the positive effects of Nero's first 5 years, over time, over the centuries and the millennia, only the books, the texts, the gossip survive. So at some point, history just becomes the best story told, and the best stories are those that paint Nero as a bloodthirsty drunk and a foolish maniac. But of course, those stories weren't just made up out of thin air. Nero was all out and about in brothels, partying with actors, hanging with those that were considered lowlives, talking about how I hate being the emperor and all that. Think of it like the president not wanting or respecting the job, and the president is 16 years old and only wants to bang hookers, hang out with his favorite artists, and some real rock star thing, and his whole life philosophy is
Cocaine's a hell of a drug.
Nero was constantly drunk and or on whatever substances were popular at the time and appeared on stages to have his moments in the spotlight, sometimes dressed like a woman because he randomly had a serious kink for that.
Is that my skirt?
What? Oh, yeah, this. I found it in your room. It's a little dated, I know, but it's very breathy on the bits.
Also, Nero didn't respect his marriage at all, especially since Octavia was very noble and PC. He didn't like that, and she was unable to have children and couldn't give him any heir. So Nero openly had a bit of a wilder mistress, Poppaea Sabina, and he got her pregnant instead. Problem was, that was considered major disrespect to the very important position of the empress. And then Nero figured, well, if people are gonna get all fussy about me cheating on the empress, then let me just divorce her and send her away into exile, so people forget about her. But that made it even worse, because the empress was a beloved, a kind woman, the perfect picture of a woman, what the Romans wanted at the time. Very noble blood. So Nero had to kind of fix the mistakes he made by sending her away, and to save face, to make up for all of it, he decided to kill her.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
He had Octavia, who was so popular people literally protested her exile and the divorce on the streets. He just had her killed and then married his pregnant mistress. And I guess karma struck immediately, because sadly his new wife's child died at just 4 months of age. This was in 62 AD, and you have to consider the narrative of this drunk, disrespectful, very young emperor who now had 2 of Rome's great noble women murdered. His mother Agrippina and his wife Octavia, both women of royal blood, of great families, both killed on the whims of a boy who doesn't respect tradition, which in turn meant that those that do honor tradition, they had no respect for Nero, and those were Rome's most powerful. And Nero wanted respect. He needed their respect. Desperately. The love of the common people wasn't enough, but when people don't give you the respect you think you deserve, you soon start to ask yourself,
is it better to be feared or respected?
Fear was the obvious answer for Nero, and once he gave into the idea of being feared by any means necessary, Nero began to unravel. Nero's rock star lifestyle escalated, and his insane orgies and feasts slowly bankrupted Rome. But all those who dared to slander or oppose him, Nero had them killed. Simple as that. Obsessed with the idea of being feared now, Nero brought back the death penalty and the treason trials, which, if you watch my Rome videos regularly, you know the treason trials were simply just the emperor's version of the Purge. Nero edition. Everybody that's a somebody that had a problem with Nero could now simply be executed, and their wealth would be added to Nero's wealth to finance his lavish lifestyle. Nero ruled the elites of Rome through fear. The literal possibility of death existed every single day, so they couldn't do anything against him. But the common people, those that didn't care much about the nobles and the elites and their bickering, they still loved Nero. And maybe that mixture of fear behind the important closed doors and the love of the masses, maybe that could have gotten Nero through this entire reign if it wasn't for one horrendous event: the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. A massive fire swept through Rome, and you have to understand that Rome was made up of wooden shacks. So this fire was like you lining up matchsticks like dominoes and then burning them. The fire swept through Rome for 9 days and destroyed 10 out of 14 districts, 71% of Rome. It was absolutely devastating. Forget about it. And this is where we arrive at the greatest lie told about Emperor Nero. Nero fiddled while Rome burned. This is simply not true. While Rome burned, Nero was not even in Rome, and fiddles didn't even exist until the 10th century, and in fact, once Nero heard that Rome burned, he actually raced back to the city, helped the relief efforts, and let hundreds of people who lost their homes stay in his palace, and then he immediately drew up plans on how to rebuild the city and make it better than before. He was still the people's champ, and if anything, this fire once more proved his love for the common people of Rome. But again, history is not written by the common people, nor were the tabloids of the time, nor were they, the common people, the ones controlling the narrative of the whispers on the streets. And it was all too easy to reframe this whole fire drama into something against Nero, because young Nero, forever harboring dreams of being loved and being a rock star, he made a crucial mistake. When he rebuilt the city, he rebuilt the imperial palace into a giant, and I mean giant palace that took up a third of the city, built on its ashes, and then he built a 120-foot statue of himself. With that, the Nero slander and accusations almost wrote themselves. A great fire sweeps through Rome and Nero is conveniently out of the city. Then he very conveniently has immediate plans to rebuild Rome. The man who loves drama and plays can now conveniently appear as the great savior and hero in times of need, and now he just so happens to have all the land necessary to build his massive palace and a giant statue of himself. This was perfect for Nero's opposition, so perfect you'd almost think they set Rome on fire. But to this day, we actually don't know who or what really caused the fire. What we do know is that this was a turning point for the public opinion of Nero. Soon enough, people started to believe those rumors and kept spreading them. Every catastrophe needs a scapegoat, and the Nero whispers made too much sense, so eventually Nero himself, he had to offer up a better scapegoat. And you know how it goes when a massive city faces a problem? Who better to blame than the outsiders, the refugees, the foreigners, the faithfuls of weird religion? The Christians, who at the time were at best a minority that was barely tolerated, offered the perfect scapegoat for Nero. And so the emperor had their most prominent leaders tortured until they would confess to anything and told everybody that they caused the great fire. So then Nero's punishment was to round up Christians from all over the city, and the lucky ones were torn apart by wild animals. The unlucky ones were nailed to crosses and then burned alive, used to light up Nero's garden festivals as human torches. And I'm just saying, if you're accused of causing a fire, I don't think that lighting your enemies on fire is the best defense. The fire and Nero's bloody vendetta to silence the rumors of the masses who turned on him, all that, it finally broke something in the emperor. And in the following year, in 65 AD, Nero's evil side peaked. The Senate and the elites were plotting to remove Nero from power, and once he got wind of their schemes, he forced 21 of them to commit suicide.
21.
Actually, I think it was 23, but I just wanted to use that 21 thing. Well, 20-something of them were forced to commit suicide, and Nero cranked up his anti-elite purges all over Rome, and soon he saw traitors everywhere, death around every corner. He became restless, easily irritated, and coped with more orgies, more drinking, and more violence, and eventually all this led to a massive fight between Nero and his wife, Poppaea Sabina. After losing their first child, Nero and his wife were blessed with another pregnancy, but during that argument, an enraged Nero lost it, and he kicked his wife and their unborn child to death. I know, the hell. But as much as this would mark Nero's ultimate descent into unforgivable evil territory, the fact that he kicked her to death was later written about by the very same people who wrote all the other lies about Nero. Simply put, it is very likely not true. In fact, kicking your wife to death, just like setting fire to your town, That stuff is so tragic and vicious that it could literally be a tale from mythology or play. And it turns out that exactly around that time there were popular Roman mythologies and plays of great fires and husbands violently killing their wives.
How about that?
It is much more likely that in 67 AD his wife died while giving birth, died along with the child itself. This is supported by a surviving poem that states his wife gave Nero a farewell speech before she passed. The death of his wife and another child completely wrecked Nero and arguably sent his mind over the edge once and for all. He had his wife stuffed and embalmed so that he could visit her in a mausoleum, and then only weeks after her death he found a 13-year-old boy, Sporos, that looked just like her, so he kidnapped the boy, castrated him, married him, forced him to wear his wife's clothes and appear as the empress in public, as well as act like her behind closed doors. And this is not a made-up story or a lie. If you're looking for a twisted Nero story, this is the one. Nero was falling apart, both his mind as well as his popularity and his reign. Publicly, he started appearing in plays wearing a mask of his dead wife and pretending to be pregnant, and he took this performance on the road, touring Rome's Eastern Empire, where there were less rumors about him, and he was still more popular, away from all the death and tragedy of the capital. But during Nero's absence, his fate in the capital was sealed. Once he returned, he would be killed. And I think Nero knew that. I think touring Eastern Rome was his equivalent of an artist's farewell tour. So when Nero was back in Rome, on June 9th, 68 AD, he woke up in his palace and found it abandoned, empty. He knew what that meant. He knew this day was coming, but being all alone still struck the boy in him who loved attention, drama, and performance. So supposedly, Nero stumbled through the empty palace screaming, "Have I neither friend nor foe?" But his foes were gathering to march on the palace in force and end his reign. But when they got there, Nero had escaped. With what little slaves he still had to support him. Of course, it wasn't hard for the army to catch up to him, and they found him in his villa, another villa, 4 miles outside of Rome. But Nero wouldn't let them take this opportunity for a final dramatic scene from him. He grabbed a dagger off of one of his slaves and famously said, "What an artist dies in me," before he tried to attempt suicide, but couldn't get himself to do it, and had one of his advisors do it for him. And when the soldiers finally got to him, Nero smiled, and his last words were, "Too late." Did Nero really say those things? In the end, did his mom really go out with an epic quote pointing at a room? Is all probably just as made up as him burning down Rome or stomping his wife to death. What is true is that Nero died at age 30 on June 9th, 68 AD, the anniversary of him ordering the murder of his first wife, Claudia Octavia. What is also true is that he was hated by all those that matter. Also, the Christians really hated him, understandably, after serving as literal burning men for Nero's ancient version of Burning Man. So over time, anyone that had anything to say painted Nero in the worst light possible. And who knows, maybe he really did all those bad things, some of them. We'll never know. But we know that Nero was forced into power by an overbearing mother, and he wanted the throne even less than Jon Snow, and yet it corrupted him as much as it did Tiberius and Caligula before him. Sitting on the throne at age 16, Nero remained a forever child. He pursued his artistic interests with childlike glee and committed his worst deeds with that same childlike glee, because being raised by a mother who let nothing stand in her way, Nero literally never learned to control his impulses. In fact, he was probably encouraged to act on them. So make of that what you will. But now you have a little more information to consider when you think of Emperor Nero, the supposed monster of Rome.